In the quiet afternoon of a suburban street, a young man named Mark strolled down the sidewalk, the sun casting a gentle warmth upon his skin. He had decided to pay a surprise visit to his grandmother, a woman who had always been a bastion of comfort and wisdom in his life. Her house, a quaint two-story with a well-kept garden, was a familiar sight that brought a smile to his face. Mark hadn't seen her in months due to his hectic university schedule, and he knew she'd be thrilled by his unexpected appearance. As he approached the gate, the squeak of its hinges echoed through the serene neighborhood. The garden, a mix of colorful flowers and lush greenery, looked as if it had been meticulously tended to, reflecting his grandmother's love for the simple beauties in life. He climbed the porch steps, his heart swelling with the thought of her reaction. In his pocket, the cold metal of the spare key sent a jolt of excitement through him as he recalled the countless times he'd used it to let himself in after school. With a quick twist of the lock, the door gave way, and Mark stepped into the welcoming embrace of the house's cool interior. The scent of freshly baked cookies wafted through the air, a delightful greeting that tickled his nostrils and reminded him of countless childhood afternoons spent in her kitchen. He called out her name, the words bouncing off the wooden floorboards and disappearing into the silent hallway. He heard the faint sound of a TV from the living room, the muffled laughter of a sitcom audience punctuating the stillness. Mark grinned. She was probably in her favorite chair, knitting away as she watched the latest episode of The Golden Girls. He tiptoed down the corridor, eager to startle her with a playful boo, and watched the color drain from her face before she realized it was just him. The living room was as he'd left it, the plush couch and armchair arranged around the old, wooden TV stand. The faded curtains were drawn, casting a soft glow over the space. But what caught Mark's eye was his grandmother, or rather, what she was doing on the couch. She wasn't knitting or watching TV. She was reclined, eyes closed, and her hand was moving rhythmically under her dress. A large, black object, unmistakable in shape and size, lay beside her. Mark's smile froze as the reality of the situation crashed over him like an icy wave, leaving him utterly speechless. The object of his grandmother's attention was a dildo, one that was clearly not a subtle addition to her bedroom play. It was a monstrous, realistic phallus, shimmering with an oily sheen that suggested it had been used extensively. Mark felt his cheeks flush with a mix of embarrassment and shock as he took in the scene before him. He had never imagined his grandmother, the woman who taught him to bake and read bedtime stories, engaged in such an act. Her breathing grew heavier, and a soft moan slipped from her lips. The sound was like a siren's call to Mark's curiosity, and despite his shock, he found himself unable to look away. The sight of her wrinkled hand working the toy, her chest heaving with each gasp, was oddly mesmerizing. He'd stumbled upon a side of her that was deeply private, a side that was both human and vulnerable, and he felt like a trespasser in the sanctity of her intimate moment. But as he watched, the line between shock and intrigue began to blur. He found himself drawn closer, his own body responding in ways he couldn't explain. The sound of her pleasure grew louder, filling the room like a crescendo. He knew he should leave, but his feet remained rooted to the spot, his eyes transfixed by the sight of her. His own hand strayed to the bulge in his pants, and before he could stop himself, he'd begun to mirror her movements, his own breath now mingling with hers in the quiet room. The TV's laugh track grew louder as the sitcom reached its climax, and so too did his grandmother's cries of pleasure. Mark felt the tension in his body coil tighter, his own climax approaching as he watched the woman he'd known all his life reach hers. His mind raced with questions and confusion, but in that moment, all that mattered was the shared intimacy of their secret, a moment that would forever change their relationship. Suddenly, his grandmother's eyes snapped open. She looked up, and for a fraction of a second, she didn't seem to register his presence. Then, her gaze fell upon Mark, and a mix of horror and embarrassment washed over her face. He saw her hand clench around the toy, as if she could somehow pull it back into her own private world. But it was too late. The moment was shattered like fine china on a marble floor. "Grandma," Mark croaked, his voice strained and thick with his own unspoken desires. She looked at him, her cheeks flaming red, and he knew that she knew he'd seen her. The silence stretched out like a tightrope between them, threatening to snap under the weight of their shared embarrassment. With trembling hands, she sat up, tucking the dildo hastily under the couch cushion. She smoothed out her dress, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape from the situation. Mark could see the wheels turning in her mind, the years of propriety and modesty clashing with the raw carnality of what had just occurred. "Mark," she said finally, her voice shaky but firm, "I am sorry you had to see that." She took a deep breath, composing herself with a dignity that was almost palpable. "But I'm not sorry for enjoying myself. I'm an adult, and I have needs." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken truths and newfound understanding. Mark felt his own arousal begin to dissipate, replaced by a profound sense of awkwardness. He nodded, unable to find his voice. He hadn't come here for this, but somehow, it felt like he'd stumbled into a doorway that could never be closed again. "I should go," he managed to say, taking a step backward. She nodded, her expression a complex tapestry of relief, regret, and a hint of something else that Mark couldn't quite place. As he turned to leave, she called out to him, "But before you do, remember one thing." Her voice was soft, but it carried a weight that stopped him in his tracks. "Life is short, and love, in all its forms, is precious." With that, Mark retreated from the room, the echo of her words and the image of her passion seared into his mind. As he closed the door behind him, he realized that the dynamics of their relationship had shifted irrevocably. There was no going back to the innocence of their past. They had crossed a threshold together, and nothing would ever be the same. He wandered into the kitchen, his thoughts a whirlwind of confusion. The smell of the cookies grew stronger, a stark contrast to the scene he'd just witnessed. He found the freshly baked tray on the counter, the golden brown circles of dough beckoning him with a sense of normalcy. He took one, hoping the sweetness would somehow dissolve the bitter taste of his own embarrassment. The crunch of the cookie filled the room, each bite a silent acknowledgement of the new reality he faced. His grandmother was not just a grandmother. She was a woman with desires, a person with needs that he'd never allowed himself to consider. The realization was both liberating and unsettling. When he heard her footsteps in the hallway, he took a deep breath. She entered the kitchen, her face a mask of resignation and a newfound openness. She didn't avoid his gaze. Instead, she met it with a look that was both apologetic and understanding. "I know this is weird for you," she began, her voice a gentle balm to his turmoil. "But I hope you can see that it's just a part of who I am." He nodded, still processing. "I just didn't expect it," he finally said. "I've never thought of you like that before." "I know, dear," she replied, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "But we all have our private moments, and it's important that we respect each other's." They stood there for a moment, the air thick with unspoken words and a newfound respect. Mark knew that their relationship had taken a turn, but he also knew that the bond they shared was stronger than any single moment. As the days passed, the memory of that afternoon grew less shocking, morphing into a new facet of their relationship. They never directly addressed the incident again, but there was a subtle shift in their interactions. A knowing glance here, a shared smile there, as if they both held a secret that had brought them closer in an unexpected way. Life continued, and Mark found himself seeing his grandmother not just as a caretaker, but as a woman who had lived a full and complex life, complete with her own set of desires and pleasures. The visit had been a surprise for both of them, but it had also been a profound lesson in empathy and the understanding of human nature. And amidst the confusion and the awkwardness, there was a strange sense of growth, a bridge built between generations on the foundation of shared experience. The next time he saw her, it was at the family dinner table, her eyes sparkling with mischief as she told a particularly racy joke. The room erupted in laughter, and Mark felt his cheeks burn again. But this time, it was not from embarrassment, but from a newfound admiration for the woman who had taught him that love and desire were as natural as breathing, and that everyone, no matter their age, had the right to pursue them without shame.